Marcus Chen had everything money could buy, but he felt completely empty inside. At 28 years old, he owned 3 luxury apartments in Manhattan, a collection of expensive cars, and a successful tech company that made millions every year. His bank account had more zeros than most people could count, yet he went to bed every night feeling lonelier than ever. The problem wasn't that Marcus couldn't find women to date. In fact, the opposite was true. Beautiful women flocked to him at every social event, every business meeting, every expensive restaurant he visited. They laughed at his jokes a little too loudly, complimented his expensive watches, and always seemed impressed when he mentioned his penthouse or his latest business deal. But Marcus had grown tired of this pattern. He could see right through their fake smiles and calculated conversations. They weren't interested in getting to know the real him. They didn't care about his childhood dreams, his fears, or his thoughts about life. All they saw was dollar signs and luxury brands. Sarah was a perfect example. She had dated Marcus for 3 months, and during that entire time, she never once asked about his family or his hobbies. Instead, she spent their dates taking selfies in his expensive car and posting photos of the designer gifts he bought her. When he tried to have deeper conversations about books or travel experiences, she would quickly change the subject back to shopping or celebrity gossip. Then there was Jessica, who seemed different at first. She worked as a teacher and claimed she didn't care about material things. But Marcus noticed how her eyes lit up whenever he mentioned expensive restaurants or weekend trips to fancy resorts. She started dropping hints about designer handbags and jewelry she admired. Within weeks, she was suggesting they move in together to his penthouse, even though they barely knew each other. The final straw came during a dinner with Rebecca, a woman he had met through mutual friends. She spent the entire evening talking about her ex-boyfriend's yacht and complaining that her current salary wasn't enough to maintain her lifestyle. When the check arrived, she didn't even reach for her purse, simply assuming Marcus would pay for everything. Halfway through dessert, she was already planning their next date to an expensive spa resort. That night, Marcus sat alone in his massive penthouse, looking out at the city lights below. The silence felt overwhelming. His phone buzzed with messages from women who wanted to see him again, but he knew none of them were genuinely interested in him as a person. They were attracted to his wealth, his status, and the lifestyle he could provide. He thought about his parents, who had been married for 35 years. They had met when they were both college students, broke and struggling to pay for textbooks. His father often told the story of how his mother agreed to their first date, even though he could only afford to take her for coffee and a walk in the park. They fell in love with each other's dreams, values, and personalities, not their bank accounts. Marcus wanted that kind of connection. He wanted someone to love him for his sense of humor, his intelligence, his kindness, and his dreams for the future. He wanted a woman who would be just as happy having a picnic in the park as dining at a 5-star restaurant. He wanted someone who would support his goals and share her own, someone who would be his partner in life's adventures. But how could he find such a person when his wealth seemed to attract only the wrong type of attention? Every time he introduced himself, people's attitudes changed the moment they learned about his success. Their conversations became more calculated, their smiles more forced, and their intentions more obvious. Marcus decided he needed to make a drastic change. He had heard stories about people who had found true love when they least expected it, often when they were being completely authentic. He realized that his expensive clothes, luxury cars, and obvious wealth were like barriers preventing genuine connections. The idea started forming in his mind slowly. What if he could meet someone who didn't know about his fortune? What if he could present himself as an ordinary guy and see if someone could fall for the real him without any external influences? He began researching how he could temporarily step away from his wealthy lifestyle. Marcus owned several properties, but he also knew about modest neighborhoods where he could blend in without attracting attention. He had casual clothes buried somewhere in his closet, clothes he wore only when working from home or exercising. The more Marcus thought about this plan, the more excited he became. For the first time in years, he felt hopeful about finding genuine love. He imagined meeting a woman who would laugh at his jokes because they were actually funny, not because she wanted to impress him. He pictured someone who would be interested in his thoughts and opinions, who would share her own dreams and fears without calculating how much money she could get from him. Of course, the plan had risks. What would happen when the truth eventually came out? How would a woman react when she discovered that the modest guy she had fallen for was actually a millionaire? Marcus decided he would cross that bridge when he came to it. For now, he just wanted the chance to be seen and loved for who he truly was as a person. Marcus spent the next few days preparing for his experiment. He researched affordable apartments in middle-class neighborhoods, looked into getting a regular job that wouldn't reveal his true identity, and planned how he would present himself as an ordinary working man. He felt nervous but determined. This was his chance to find the authentic love he had been searching for his entire adult life. Little did he know that this decision would lead to experiences that would completely change his perspective on relationships, money, and what truly mattered in life. The wealthy businessman was about to discover whether true love could exist when money was removed from the equation. His journey to find genuine connection was just beginning. Marcus spent weeks preparing for his new life as an ordinary person. He rented a small one-bedroom apartment in Queens, far from his usual Manhattan social circles. The place was tiny compared to his penthouse, with basic furniture and no luxury amenities, but it felt strangely liberating. He packed away his expensive watches, designer suits, and luxury accessories, replacing them with simple jeans, regular t-shirts, and a basic watch he bought from a department store. Finding the right job proved more challenging than expected. Marcus needed something that wouldn't reveal his business background or education, but also something he could actually perform convincingly. After careful consideration, he decided to work as a delivery driver for a local restaurant. It was honest work that would allow him to interact with people naturally while staying completely anonymous. The first day at Romano's Pizza was humbling. Marcus had never worked in food service before, and everything felt foreign. He had to learn how to use the cash register, memorize the menu, and navigate the delivery routes around the neighborhood. His hands, which were used to signing million-dollar contracts, now carried pizza boxes and counted small tips. His co-workers were friendly but treated him like any other new employee. Tony, the manager, was a middle-aged man who had been running the restaurant for 15 years. He patiently showed Marcus the delivery routes and explained how to handle difficult customers. Maria, who worked behind the counter, helped him learn the computer system and shared stories about her 2 young children. For the first time in years, Marcus was surrounded by people who saw him as just another working person trying to make ends meet. They didn't care about his background or his financial status. They judged him purely on his work ethic and personality. It was refreshing, but also challenging, as he had to prove himself in ways he hadn't experienced since college. The dating scene in his new life was completely different from what he was used to. Marcus created profiles on dating apps using photos in his casual clothes and describing himself as a delivery driver. The responses were dramatically different from what he typically received. Instead of dozens of messages from women eager to meet him, he got only a few replies, and many conversations fizzled out quickly. His first date under his new identity was with Jennifer, a nurse who worked at a local hospital. They met at a coffee shop near her workplace, and Marcus was nervous in a way he hadn't felt in years. Without his wealth as a conversation starter, he had to rely entirely on his personality and genuine interests. Jennifer was kind and down to earth, but Marcus could sense her lack of romantic interest almost immediately. She talked about her demanding work schedule and her goals of traveling to Europe someday. When Marcus suggested they could meet again, she politely declined, saying she was too busy with work and wasn't really looking for anything serious at the moment. The rejection stung more than Marcus expected. In his wealthy life, women rarely turned him down directly. Now he was experiencing what ordinary men faced regularly in the dating world. He realized how much his money had shielded him from the normal challenges of forming romantic connections. His second attempt was with Lisa, a teacher who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know him. They had a pleasant dinner at a modest Italian restaurant, and she laughed at his stories about delivery mishaps and difficult customers. Marcus felt hopeful as they talked about books, movies, and their childhood memories. But when Lisa learned that he was just a delivery driver with no college degree and no clear career ambitions, her enthusiasm noticeably decreased. She started checking her phone more frequently and gave shorter responses to his questions. At the end of the evening, she thanked him for dinner, but made it clear she wasn't interested in a second date. Marcus found himself rejected again and again over the following weeks. Women who had initially seemed interested would lose enthusiasm when they learned about his modest job and simple lifestyle. Some were direct about their preferences, explaining they were looking for someone with more education or better career prospects. Others simply stopped responding to his messages after a few conversations. The experience was eye-opening and painful. Marcus began to understand how much pressure ordinary men faced to prove their worth through their careers and financial stability. He also realized that even women who claimed to value personality and connection still had practical considerations about their future partner's earning potential. One particularly difficult evening came after a date with Amanda, a marketing coordinator who had seemed perfect during their online conversations. She was intelligent, funny, and shared many of his interests. But during their dinner, she kept asking pointed questions about his career goals and financial plans. When Marcus tried to steer the conversation toward more personal topics, she seemed distracted and uninterested. Amanda ended the date early, claiming she had an early morning meeting. As Marcus walked back to his small apartment, he felt more discouraged than ever. Was it impossible to find someone who would love him purely for his personality and character? Were his previous assumptions about women being attracted only to money actually correct? These doubts made him question his entire experiment. Perhaps genuine love without financial considerations was just a naive fantasy. Maybe compatibility really did require similar educational and economic backgrounds. Marcus wondered if he was being unfair to these women by hiding such a fundamental part of his identity. But despite the disappointments, Marcus noticed positive changes in himself. Working at the restaurant had taught him the value of honest labor and given him appreciation for people who worked hard for modest wages. His conversations with co-workers like Maria and Tony had shown him different perspectives on family, dreams, and what constituted a successful life. Marcus also discovered interests and talents he had forgotten about. Without the pressure of business meetings and social obligations, he had time to read books he enjoyed, take long walks through his new neighborhood, and really listen to people's stories. He found himself becoming more patient, more empathetic, and more genuine in his interactions. The rejection still hurt, but Marcus was determined to continue his search. Somewhere out there, he believed, was a woman who could see past surface-level concerns and connect with the real person he was becoming. He just had to keep trying and stay true to his authentic self, even when it felt impossibly difficult. After 2 months of disappointing dates and constant rejections, Marcus began to lose hope. He had been turned down by 12 different women, each for similar reasons related to his modest lifestyle and career prospects. The loneliness felt even deeper now because he knew that his real wealth was sitting unused while he struggled to find basic human connection. Some evenings, Marcus would sit in his small apartment and question whether this experiment was worth the emotional pain. He could easily return to his penthouse, put on an expensive suit, and have dinner dates lined up within hours. But every time he considered giving up, he reminded himself why he started this journey. He wanted to find someone who would love Marcus the person, not Marcus the millionaire. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday evening in October. Marcus was making his last delivery of the day to an apartment building in Astoria. The order was for apartment 4B, and when he knocked on the door, he expected another routine transaction. Instead, the door opened to reveal a young woman with paint-stained clothes and tired eyes. Her name was Elena Rodriguez, and she was clearly having a difficult day. She apologized profusely for ordering food so late, explaining that she had been working on an art project and completely lost track of time. As she searched her purse for money to pay for the pizza, Marcus noticed several colorful canvases propped against the walls of her small studio apartment. Elena was different from the other women Marcus had encountered. She didn't seem to be judging his appearance or his job. Instead, she was genuinely apologetic about keeping him out late and even offered him a bottle of water, noticing that he looked tired from his long day of deliveries. Their conversation was brief but natural. Elena mentioned that she was preparing for a small art show at a local community center, and Marcus found himself genuinely interested in her work. She showed him one of her paintings, a vibrant street scene that captured the energy of their neighborhood perfectly. Her passion for her art was evident in the way her eyes lit up as she described her creative process. When Marcus returned to Romano's Pizza that evening, he couldn't stop thinking about Elena. There had been something authentic and refreshing about their brief interaction. Unlike his previous dates, she hadn't asked about his career plans or his educational background. She had simply treated him as a fellow human being worthy of basic kindness and respect. Over the next few days, Marcus found himself hoping he would get another delivery to Elena's apartment building. When Tony assigned him a delivery to that area, Marcus volunteered eagerly, even though it wasn't on his usual route. Unfortunately, none of the orders were for apartment 4B. Finally, Marcus decided to take a direct approach. After his shift on Friday evening, he stopped by Elena's building and knocked on her door. When she answered, he felt nervous in a way that surprised him. He explained that he had been thinking about her art show and wondered if she would like to get coffee sometime to talk about it. Elena hesitated for a moment, and Marcus prepared himself for another rejection. But instead of declining, she smiled and agreed to meet him the following Saturday afternoon at a small cafe near her apartment. She seemed genuinely pleased that someone was interested in her artwork, and Marcus felt a spark of hope that he hadn't experienced in months. Their first official date was unlike any Marcus had experienced in years. Elena arrived at the cafe, wearing simple jeans and a colorful scarf, carrying a small sketchbook under her arm. She ordered just a regular coffee and a muffin, and when Marcus offered to pay for her order, she insisted on splitting the bill. The conversation flowed naturally. From the beginning, Elena talked about her art with genuine passion, describing how she had moved to New York 3 years ago to pursue her dream of becoming a professional artist. She worked part-time at a local bookstore to pay her bills while spending every free moment painting and applying to galleries. Marcus found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected. He told Elena about his interest in books and travel, carefully avoiding any details that might reveal his true financial situation. He spoke about feeling stuck in his current job and searching for more meaning in his life. These weren't lies exactly, because they reflected his genuine feelings about his current situation. Elena listened attentively and asked thoughtful questions. She didn't seem concerned about his lack of clear career goals or his modest lifestyle. Instead, she was interested in his thoughts, his dreams, and his perspective on life. For the first time since starting his experiment, Marcus felt truly seen and appreciated for who he was as a person. As their coffee date extended into the late afternoon, Marcus learned more about Elena's background. She had grown up in a working-class family in Philadelphia, where her parents had worked multiple jobs to support their 3 children. Elena had earned a scholarship to art school, but still graduated with significant student loan debt. She was determined to succeed as an artist, despite the financial challenges. Elena's story made Marcus realize how privileged his own background had been, even before he became wealthy. He had never worried about student loans or struggled to pay rent while pursuing his dreams. This realization made him even more impressed by Elena's determination and resilience. When they finally parted ways that evening, Elena thanked Marcus for genuinely listening to her talk about her art. She mentioned that most people either dismissed her career choice as impractical or only showed interest when they thought she might become famous someday. Marcus's genuine curiosity about her creative process had meant a lot to her. As Marcus walked back to his apartment that night, he felt more optimistic than he had in months. Elena seemed to appreciate him for exactly who he was presenting himself to be. She hadn't asked about his income, his car, or his apartment. She had been interested in his thoughts, his values, and his character. But even as he felt hopeful about this new connection, Marcus knew he was walking a dangerous line. The longer he got to know Elena, the harder it would be to eventually reveal the truth about his wealth. He pushed these concerns aside for now, focusing instead on the excitement of finally meeting someone who seemed to value authenticity over material success. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Elena began spending more time together, and their relationship developed naturally and beautifully. They would meet for coffee after Marcus finished his delivery shifts, take long walks through different neighborhoods, and visit free museums and art galleries on weekends. Elena introduced Marcus to parts of the city he had never explored, even though he had lived in New York for years. Elena's approach to life was refreshing and inspiring. She found joy in simple pleasures that Marcus had long forgotten about. She would get excited about finding a $20 bill in an old jacket pocket or discovering a new cafe with affordable pastries. She collected interesting leaves during their walks and turned them into art projects. Her enthusiasm for small discoveries made Marcus see his surroundings with fresh eyes. Their dates were always modest and creative. Elena suggested picnics in Central Park using sandwiches they made themselves, movie nights at her apartment watching films from the library, and visits to free art shows in community centers. Marcus found these simple activities more enjoyable than any expensive restaurant or luxury event he had attended in his previous life. The physical attraction between them grew gradually and felt completely genuine. When Elena laughed at his stories or took his arm while they walked, Marcus knew her affection wasn't motivated by anything other than her feelings for him as a person. When they finally kissed after their fourth date, it felt more meaningful than any romantic moment from his wealthy lifestyle. But as their relationship deepened, Marcus began struggling with the weight of his deception. Elena would sometimes mention her financial stress, talking about how she had to choose between buying art supplies and getting her phone repaired, or how she was considering taking on extra shifts at the bookstore to afford a new easel. These conversations made Marcus feel guilty about his hidden wealth, especially when he could easily solve all her problems without even noticing the expense. One evening, Elena showed Marcus her tiny studio space in a shared artists' building. The rent was still a significant portion of her monthly income, but it was the only place she could afford that had decent lighting for her work. She had decorated the small space with colorful fabric and plants, making it feel warm and inviting, despite its obvious limitations. As Elena proudly displayed her latest paintings, Marcus noticed a stack of unpaid bills on her desk. He saw notices for her student loan payments, her health insurance, and her credit card. The amounts weren't huge by his standards, but he knew they represented serious financial pressure for Elena. He had to resist the urge to offer help, knowing it would raise questions about his own financial situation. Elena never complained about her circumstances or asked Marcus for any kind of financial assistance. In fact, she insisted on paying her own way during their dates and occasionally treated him to coffee or lunch when she had a good day at the bookstore. Her independence and pride were admirable, but they also made Marcus's deception feel more complicated. The situation became more difficult when Elena's art show at the community center finally opened. Marcus attended the opening night, feeling proud to support someone whose work he genuinely admired. Elena's paintings were vibrant and emotional, depicting scenes of urban life with a unique perspective that caught many people's attention. Several visitors expressed interest in purchasing Elena's work, and she was thrilled by the positive response. However, Marcus quickly realized that even if Elena sold every painting in the show, the total amount would barely cover her rent for 2 months. The art world's economics were harsh, and talented artists like Elena struggled financially while their work brought joy to others. During the opening reception, Marcus met some of Elena's friends from art school. They were all talented, passionate, people who were struggling with similar financial challenges while pursuing their creative dreams. They talked about taking turns buying groceries, sharing art supplies, and supporting each other through the difficult periods when sales were slow. Marcus felt like an outsider listening to their conversations about budgeting and financial sacrifices. These people were living authentic lives, pursuing their passions despite real hardship, while he was essentially playing a role. The guilt weighed on him more heavily each day. But he also feared that revealing the truth might destroy the genuine connection he had found with Elena. The internal conflict intensified when Elena mentioned her dream of traveling to Europe to study classical art techniques. She had been saving money for 2 years, putting aside small amounts whenever possible, hoping to afford the trip someday. Her eyes lit up when she talked about visiting the Louvre and the Uffizi Gallery, experiencing masterpieces she had only seen in books. Marcus knew he could make Elena's dream come true with a single phone call to his travel agent. He could arrange first-class flights, luxury accommodations, and private tours of the world's greatest museums. But doing so would require revealing his true identity and potentially destroying the authentic relationship they had built. Instead, Marcus found himself making supportive comments about Elena's savings plan and encouraging her to keep working toward her goal. Inside, he felt like a fraud for not offering help when he easily could. But he also feared that his wealth might change Elena's feelings toward him, just as it had affected every other relationship in his life. The emotional complexity of the situation reached a peak one evening when Elena cooked dinner for Marcus in her small apartment. She had spent her last $30 on ingredients to make his favorite pasta dish, wanting to create a special evening for them. As they ate by candlelight, Elena talked about how happy she had been since meeting Marcus and how much his support meant to her artistic endeavors. Marcus felt overwhelmed by Elena's generosity and kindness. Here was someone who had very little money but was willing to spend her last dollars to make him happy. Meanwhile, he was sitting on millions of dollars while watching her struggle with basic expenses. The contrast made him question not only his deception, but also his entire understanding of generosity and love. That night, as Marcus walked back to his modest apartment, he knew he was facing a critical decision point. His relationship with Elena was becoming serious, and continuing the deception felt increasingly wrong. But he also feared that revealing his wealth might destroy the most authentic and meaningful relationship he had ever experienced. Marcus realized that his experiment had succeeded in one way. He had found someone who could love him for who he truly was as a person. But it had also created an impossible situation where his hidden truth threatened to undermine everything beautiful they had built together. The crisis that forced Marcus to confront his deception came unexpectedly on a cold December morning. Elena called him at work, her voice shaky and filled with panic. Her landlord had just informed all tenants that the building had been sold to developers who planned to demolish it within 60 days. Elena and her fellow artists had to find new places to live and work immediately in one of the most expensive rental markets in the country. Marcus felt his heart sink as Elena explained the situation through tears. She had been looking at available apartments all morning, and everything remotely affordable was either too small for her art supplies or located so far from her job that the commute would be impossible. The few places within her budget were in unsafe neighborhoods or had no natural light for painting. Elena's desperation was heartbreaking to witness. She talked about possibly having to move back to Philadelphia to live with her parents, which would mean giving up on her artistic dreams and the life she had built in New York. She had worked so hard to establish herself in the city's art community, and losing her studio space felt like losing everything she had worked toward. That evening, Marcus met Elena at her apartment to help her start packing. The space that had felt cozy and creative just weeks before now felt cramped and sad, with boxes scattered everywhere and her artwork wrapped in protective materials. Elena moved through her belongings methodically, but Marcus could see the grief in her eyes as she prepared to leave behind the life she loved. As they packed her art supplies, Elena mentioned that several of her artist friends were facing the same crisis. The building had been home to dozens of creative people who couldn't afford Manhattan rents but needed to stay in the city for work opportunities. The displacement was scattering a whole community of artists who had supported each other through difficult times. Marcus watched Elena carefully wrap each painting, knowing that some represented months of work and creative energy. She handled each piece with such care, even though she wasn't sure where she would have space to display them again. The injustice of the situation made Marcus feel angry and helpless, but also increasingly guilty about his own comfortable financial position. That night, alone in his own apartment, Marcus made a decision that had been building for weeks. He couldn't continue watching Elena suffer through problems he could easily solve, and he couldn't build a serious relationship on such a fundamental lie. The risk of losing her was real, but the alternative of continuing his deception felt worse. Marcus spent the entire night planning exactly what he would tell Elena and how he would explain his months of deception. He knew he needed to be completely honest about his motivations while also being prepared for her potential anger and disappointment. The conversation would determine whether their relationship had a future or whether his experiment in finding true love would end in heartbreak. The next evening, Marcus asked Elena to meet him at the small cafe where they had their first date. He chose the location deliberately, hoping the positive memories associated with the place might help soften the impact of what he needed to reveal. Elena arrived looking exhausted from another day of apartment hunting, but she still smiled when she saw him. Marcus began by telling Elena how much their relationship meant to him and how much he had learned about himself through knowing her. He explained that meeting her had changed his perspective on what truly mattered in life and had shown him the difference between superficial attraction and genuine connection. Elena listened quietly, sensing that something important was coming. Then Marcus took a deep breath and began revealing the truth. He told Elena about his real identity, his successful company, his wealth, and his decision to hide his financial status in order to find authentic love. He explained how previous relationships had been motivated by money rather than genuine affection, and how he had wanted to discover whether someone could love him for his true self. Elena's expression changed dramatically as Marcus spoke. Confusion gave way to shock, then to what looked like betrayal and anger. She sat in silence for several minutes after he finished talking, processing the magnitude of what he had revealed. Marcus waited, his heart pounding, knowing that these next few minutes would determine everything. When Elena finally spoke, her voice was quiet but filled with hurt. She asked why he hadn't trusted her enough to be honest from the beginning. She wondered aloud whether their entire relationship had been a lie, whether his feelings for her were real or just part of an elaborate experiment. The pain in her voice made Marcus realize how deeply his deception had wounded her. Elena also expressed anger about the times he had watched her struggle financially without offering help. She felt manipulated and studied, like a subject in a psychology experiment, rather than a partner in a genuine relationship. The fact that he had hidden something so fundamental about himself made her question everything she thought she knew about his character. But as Elena continued talking, Marcus could hear something else beneath her anger and hurt. She admitted that she had genuinely fallen in love with the person she thought he was, the delivery driver who listened to her dreams and supported her art without expecting anything in return. She wondered whether that person had been real or just a performance. Marcus tried to explain that his feelings for her had been completely genuine, and that the person she had fallen in love with was the real him, just without the context of his wealth. He told her that being with her had helped him discover parts of himself that had been buried under years of superficial relationships and material concerns. The conversation lasted for hours, with Elena asking difficult questions about his motivations and Marcus trying to explain the loneliness and authenticity seeking that had driven his deception. By the end of the evening, Elena said she needed time to think about everything and decide whether she could trust him again. As they parted that night, Marcus felt both relief at finally telling the truth and terror at the possibility of losing the most meaningful relationship of his life. Elena's final words were that she would call him when she had processed everything and decided what she wanted to do. Marcus returned to his small apartment, knowing that the next few days would determine whether his search for true love had succeeded, or whether his deception had destroyed the very thing he had been seeking. The waiting would be agonizing, but at least the truth was finally out in the open. For 3 days, Marcus heard nothing from Elena. He continued working his delivery job, but his heart wasn't in it. Every phone notification made him hope it might be a message from her, but none came. Tony noticed his distracted state and asked if everything was okay, but Marcus couldn't explain the complicated situation he had created. On the 4th day, Elena finally called. Her voice was calmer than it had been during their difficult conversation, but Marcus couldn't read her emotions. Over the phone, she asked if they could meet at the park where they had shared their first picnic, saying she had made some decisions and wanted to discuss them face to face. Marcus arrived at the park early, sitting on the same bench where they had laughed together, just a few weeks before. When Elena appeared, she looked tired but determined. She sat beside him but maintained some distance, and Marcus prepared himself for what he feared would be the end of their relationship. Elena began by acknowledging that she had spent the past few days thinking about everything Marcus had told her. She had been angry, hurt, and confused, but she had also tried to understand his motivations and evaluate whether their relationship had any foundation to build upon. Her measured tone made it impossible for Marcus to guess what conclusion she had reached. She told Marcus that she understood his frustration with relationships that were based on his wealth rather than his character. Elena admitted that she had seen how differently people treated those with money, and she could imagine how isolating that experience might be. However, she also explained how betrayed she felt by his deception, especially during moments when she had been vulnerable about her financial struggles. Elena's biggest concern was whether Marcus had genuinely fallen in love with her, or whether she had simply been a successful test subject in his experiment. She needed to know if his feelings were real and if he respected her as an equal partner rather than someone to be studied or fixed. This question got to the heart of what Marcus had been grappling with himself. Marcus responded with complete honesty. He told Elena that while his initial motivation had been experimental, his feelings for her had become genuine very quickly. He explained that she had taught him about authenticity, resilience, and finding joy in simple pleasures. He admitted that watching her struggle financially had been difficult precisely because he cared about her so much, not because he saw her as a charity case. He also acknowledged that his deception had been wrong, regardless of his motivations. Marcus explained that he had been so focused on avoiding relationships based on money that he had created a different kind of dishonesty. He promised that if she was willing to give him another chance, he would never hide anything important from her again. Elena listened carefully to everything Marcus said, asking clarifying questions about his intentions and his feelings. She seemed to be evaluating not just his words, but his sincerity and his understanding of how his actions had affected her. The conversation felt like the most important job interview of Marcus's life. After a long pause, Elena revealed her decision. She said that despite her hurt and anger, she believed Marcus's feelings for her were genuine. She had fallen in love with his kindness, his curiosity about her art, and his willingness to listen to her dreams. She believed those qualities were real, even if the context around them had been false. However, Elena also set clear conditions for moving forward. She wanted Marcus to understand that she had fallen in love with a delivery driver, not a millionaire, and she needed to know that he respected the person she was, regardless of his ability to solve her financial problems. She didn't want to be transformed into a different person just because he had money. Elena also insisted on maintaining her independence. She wanted to continue working, pursuing her art career on her own terms, and contributing equally to their relationship. She made it clear that while she appreciated his desire to help with her housing crisis, she didn't want to become dependent on his wealth or lose her sense of self-reliance. Marcus agreed to Elena's conditions wholeheartedly. He realized that her insistence on independence was one of the qualities he admired most about her. He promised to respect her autonomy while also being honest about his resources when situations arose where he could genuinely help. They decided to start their relationship over with complete honesty, but also with the foundation of genuine affection they had already built. Marcus would gradually transition back to his real life, but he wanted to do so in a way that honored the lessons he had learned during his time as a delivery driver. The housing crisis provided their first opportunity to navigate this new dynamic. Elena had found a small apartment she could afford, but it was in a difficult neighborhood with no space for her art. Marcus offered to help her find something better, but he approached the conversation carefully, respecting her independence, while being honest about his resources. Together, they found a compromise that felt right to both of them. Marcus helped Elena secure a beautiful studio apartment in a safe neighborhood that was within her budget when they split the rent as roommates. This arrangement allowed her to maintain her financial independence while benefiting from his ability to contribute more. Elena insisted on signing the lease and taking equal responsibility for their shared home. Moving in together was a significant step that required careful navigation of their different backgrounds. Marcus gradually reintroduced elements of his real lifestyle, but he did so thoughtfully. Instead of overwhelming Elena with luxury, he focused on sharing experiences that mattered to both of them. They traveled together, but Elena helped plan trips that balanced her desire for authentic cultural experiences with Marcus's ability to make those experiences more comfortable. Elena's art career flourished in their new environment. With a proper studio space and Marcus's understanding of business, she was able to focus more time on creating and less time worrying about basic survival. Marcus helped her navigate the business side of art sales and gallery representation, but he was careful to support her vision rather than trying to control her career direction. Their relationship deepened as they learned to blend their different worlds authentically. Marcus introduced Elena to some of his business colleagues, but he chose carefully, focusing on people who appreciated art and culture rather than those who were impressed only by wealth. Elena introduced Marcus to her artistic community, where he became known as someone who genuinely supported emerging artists. The most meaningful moment came when Elena's European travel dream finally became reality. Instead of simply paying for an expensive trip, Marcus researched programs for emerging artists to study abroad. He helped Elena apply for a prestigious residency program in Florence that would advance her career while fulfilling her desire to study classical techniques. When she was accepted, they celebrated together, knowing that she had earned the opportunity through her talent and hard work. Marcus also made changes to his business life based on what he had learned during his experiment. He began investing in programs that supported struggling artists and small businesses. He started a foundation that provided affordable studio spaces for creative people, remembering his friends from Elena's art community who had been displaced from their building. The delivery job had taught Marcus valuable lessons about treating all people with respect, regardless of their economic status. In his business dealings, he became known for his fairness and consideration toward employees at every level. The empathy he had developed while working alongside people like Tony and Maria influenced every aspect of his professional life. 1 year after their reunion in the park, Marcus proposed to Elena in the same community center where her first art show had taken place. The proposal was simple and personal, focusing on their shared commitment to authenticity and mutual support. Elena said yes, but she also made it clear that marriage would be a partnership of equals, regardless of their different financial backgrounds. Their wedding was a perfect reflection of their relationship. They held the ceremony in Elena's art studio, surrounded by her paintings and their closest friends from both worlds. The celebration was elegant but not ostentatious, focusing on the love they had found and the authentic life they were building together. Marcus's search for true love had succeeded, but not in the way he had originally imagined. He had learned that genuine connection required not just finding the right person, but also becoming the right person himself. His time living modestly had taught him empathy, gratitude, and the difference between wanting someone and truly loving them. Elena had taught him that authentic love meant accepting and supporting each other's dreams while maintaining individual identity and purpose. Their relationship worked because both people brought their whole selves to it, including their different backgrounds, strengths, and perspectives. Years later, as Marcus watched Elena preparing for her first solo show at a prestigious Manhattan gallery, he reflected on his journey. The wealth that had once isolated him from genuine connection had become a tool for supporting the dreams and communities he cared about. But more importantly, he had found a partner who loved him for his character, his values, and his commitment to their shared life. The experiment had taught Marcus that true love wasn't about finding someone who didn't care about money, but about finding someone who cared about the right things. Elena had never been interested in his wealth for its own sake, but she had appreciated his willingness to use his resources thoughtfully and generously. Together, they had created a relationship based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection that had nothing to do with bank account balances. Marcus had hidden his fortune to search for true love, and through rejection, deception, honesty, and finally authentic partnership, he had found something even more valuable than he had been seeking. He had found not just love, but a way to live that honored both his resources and his values, surrounded by people who saw and appreciated his true self.